In this video today we're making a wire wrapped tree of life on a crescent moon shaped crystal. For this design here I make a little crescent shape out of wire for the back, and we wrap the wires from the tree around the edges of the crystal and onto that crescent shape wire at the back to secure it all in place. You can find this kit and supplies to make our other designs on our website creativefunk.com. First up, we want to make that little crescent moon shape out of wire for the back. So we need 7 inches of 20 gauge wire. And we're going to start by making our bail. So just leaving a little tail at the end there straight, then I just start by bringing it around my round nose pliers. Bringing it around 2 full loops for a nice strong bail, and then we can bring this little tail piece around the other piece of wire. And crimp it down nice and tight to secure that bail. You can check your little loops for your bail now and just make sure they're nice and close together and rounded, and then you should have a nice little strong bail that looks something like this. Now we've got our beautiful little crescent moon crystal, which is about 30 millimeters wide and about 18 millimeters across that smaller part in the middle. You want to figure out which side you want the front to be, and then we're going to hold our bail near the top and start to bring that wire around to form the little crescent shape. So I'm just holding my bail at the top there and then gently following the same shape as the crystal, so that I can make a shape the same as the crystal but just slightly smaller. Bringing it around and a nice sharp bend on the point there, so I can bring it back for the inside of our crescent moon. It doesn't have to be perfect, just as long as it's a little bit smaller than that crystal, and it goes around sort of covering most of that crystal area on the back and sort of into each point. That will give you enough of a shape to wrap your wire around. Once you've moulded it into the general shape there, you can do another sharp bend at the point on this end and just bring your wire back to the bail. Once it's sitting in the position that you want it, you can bring that wire around the bottom of the bail a couple of times, nice and tight and tidy, to secure that bail and crescent moon shape in place. Then we can cut our tail off nice and short and crimp it in tight so it's out of the way. Now you can make sure that your little crescent shape is sitting within the boundary of your crystal there. You can bend it into shape a little bit if it needs it. Just check your bail as well, that it's all sitting nicely and nice and straight. And check your crescent from the front as well, just make sure that you can't really see the shape from the front as well. I'm pretty happy with mine how it is there. The bail's sitting nicely at the top and I can't see my little wire shaped moon from the front, so we're good to go. Now we're going to move on to making the tree of life part of our little pendant. So for this part here we need 16 4-inch lengths of 26 gauge wire. So I just measure and cut all 16 4-inch lengths. Now we want to place all 16 of our 4-inch lengths together and line them up so that all the ends are together. It helps if they're nice and straight, and then you can tack them on the table or however you want to get those ends all matching up. Once you're happy with all your wires there, we're going to start to twist from the middle down. So just in this little section here. And just twisting all of those wires around a couple of times to secure them together. And then leaving a space at the bottom that you don't twist as well. Those are going to be our roots, which we are going to wrap around our crystal. So we can fan them out a little bit as well. We're just twisting this part in between to be our tree trunk. They're quite delicate little trees, these ones with 26 gauge wire. You can add more wires in there if you want a fuller tree or less, or you could also use a different gauge of wire. I often use 24 gauge wire as well if it's a slightly bigger crystal. It's totally up to you. There's certainly no right or wrong way with these trees, so this is just sort of how I make one of my designs. You can do yours however you like. But we just basically do it by eye, and we're going to attach our roots around the underneath of the crystal here. So I just start by placing them on there and sort of fanning them out, getting them into the position that you want them in so that you can attach them onto your little wire at the back. I like these little roots to be sort of fanned out at the bottom and quite even looking, so I sort of try and spread them out a little bit. On these crescent crystals, I tend to bend the trunk of my tree to the left a little bit to follow the crystal around. And I'm going to start to pull some of these wires off the sides here for our branches. So off our main twist coming up for the trunk, I just start by taking about 3 or 4 wires off on each side and giving them a few twists to start the branches. There is no set rule for making these trees, you just do it by sight and take some wires off as you go, making it however you want it to look. After I've taken a few wires off the side, I just twist that centerpiece up a little bit higher as well, just to give our tree some height, and then take a few more wires off the sides. You could have a taller tree with less branches, or you could add some extra wires in there and have a bushier tree, but it's totally up to you. I'm just getting the general sizing and then checking it on my crystal quite often just to make sure that it's in proportion. If they were in bunches of 3, then I can take 1 wire out and twist the 2 wires a little bit further out, but you'll start to see as you're forming these branches what sort of looks natural and what you like the look of. I like to make my trees generally quite symmetrical. Sometimes they do have an extra wire on one side or the other, and sometimes you can bend your trunk one way or the other. Generally, if you can have them looking like a natural tree, that's often better. Once we've got the general size of our tree, then we're going to go ahead and start to put it onto our crystal. It's just easier if you do most of the twisting now without it being on there, and then you can do a little bit more after it's already attached. So you want to check your little wire wrap onto your crystal quite often. Just see how it's progressing, just to make sure that the sizing is fitting right and that you're going to have most of your tree on the front of the crystal. You don't want to twist it too far off the edge. Basically at the moment I'm just making sure that the roots come underneath the end there, and that I'm happy with the twists and sort of the proportion of the tree to the size of the crystal. Once you're happy with the general sizing of your tree, we're going to go ahead and tape that little wire crescent shape onto the back of our crystal there. Just making sure you've got the front and the back. Sometimes there's little inclusions in the crystal that you'll want to have on show on the front of your crystal, so just place your wire accordingly. So I'm just taping it on, and we want to leave the bottom free so that we can access the bottom part of this little crescent here and wrap our roots around that part. Now we can attach our little wire wrap tree onto the front. So I just sort of bend the branches in an upwards direction. We just want them out of the way so that we can focus on the roots down the bottom here to start with. So another piece of electrical tape here, and we're just going to hold that little tree in place. just in the middle somewhere here, so that we've got access to the roots around the bottom part. Then we can focus on putting our roots into the position that we like and start to wrap them underneath. So just spreading those wires out a little bit so that they're going to help to hold that crystal secure. Fanning them out a little bit evenly and then bringing them around the back side of the crystal here. I'm actually just going to cut a little bit off these wires just so they're a bit more manageable as I bend them around the wire moon shape. So just spreading all those wires that are going to be the tree roots out, so they're not overlapped and they're all sort of sitting evenly underneath the bottom there. So about the middle of our bunch of wires here, I'm just going to start with my little needle nose pliers and just gently bend it underneath that wire, pulling it nice and tight, and then we're working it around to do one full loop around the thicker wire. Now we're going to work our way outwards. So just picking up that next wire to the right and doing the same thing again. So bringing it under that wire at the back and bending it around to bring it around one full loop. It really does help if you've got some nice precise or needle nose pliers for this part here. Just makes it a lot easier bending those wires around and getting them exactly in where you want them. I find a good technique is actually to grab the wire and then push it against the electrical tape so that it makes a little bend in the end of the wire, and then it's like a loop that you can just hook underneath that back wire. So I'm going to work my way out to the right hand side with all of these little wires here, just doing one full loop around, and at the very end wire I'll do 2 loops around just to make sure that's extra secure. Then I'll come back to the middle and work outwards to the left hand side as well, doing 1 loop on each wire and 2 on that very end one as well. I find 1 full loop around on all these middle wires is enough to keep your wire wrap secure. It also means it doesn't get too bulky down here with the wires all wrapped around multiple times. Once you've wrapped each wire around 1 full loop, it will look something like this. So you can see that all the wires are secure. So I'm going to just come back to the center of my wires there and give each one a little tug, bend it down and then snip it off really nice and short so that I can crimp it on securely onto the wire. So again, I'm just working my way from the middle to the outside of all our wires, working my way out to the right hand side, giving each wire a little tug, bending it down and then cutting it nice and short and crimping it onto that wire nice and tight. As long as your wires are pulled nice and tight onto that little crescent moon shape on the back, it should be nice and secure with the 1 loop around for each of those middle wires and 2 loops around for the wires on each end. These Tree of Life wraps do take a bit of patience and time to get them nice and tidy, especially if you've got a lot of wires in the mix like we do here. But they're so cute, I really think they're worth it in the end. Now the bottom of your pendant should look like this, and all of those wires around the bottom should be nice and secure onto that little crescent shape. So you want to just check it from the front as well. You can still move these wires a little bit at the bottom of the twist there, and you want to make sure that your little crescent shape out of wire is sitting nicely on the back there. Now we can take our little piece of electrical tape off so that we can move on to our branches of the tree. I find I can do this next part of the wrap without any electrical tape. You might find it's easier if you secure it on the bottom, it's up to you. But I find it's good to be able to actually pop that crystal in and out so that you can check how your wire wrap's going. Now we've got all our roots secured on there, you want to just start to get a nice feel for how you want your tree to be. So you want it to be all proportioned onto the crescent moon. You can adjust any of your wires now or undo any of them, even the roots, you can still maneuver those if they're not quite how you like it. But you can start to see how your tree is going to be formed onto the crystal and what wires will be coming down around the sides of your crystal to hold it all in place. It is up to you though if you have a short stumpy trunk and then lots of branches coming off sideways. Or you can have a sort of a skinnier, taller tree with them just coming up higher. You can also twist the trunk a little bit and bend it one way or the other. Same with the branches, but I tend to have my trunks on these crystals trending towards the left because of the shape of the crystal kind of heading towards the left as well. But to start with, we're just getting the basic shape and the basic twists and starting to form our branches into a nice symmetrical sort of tree. The more angles you can bring wires around, the more secure your crystal is going to be. So I'm going to bring a couple of them off the side here, bringing them around and twisting them so that I know that I'm going to be able to lock that crystal in place. It's also up to you whether you twist right to the edge of your crystal or whether you sort of twist them off a bit sooner. At this point here too, because 26 gauge wire is quite thin, occasionally you might break one, and if that happens then I actually just take my crystal out and add one into the twist. So twist it right through and then wrap it onto the bottom as an extra root and then bring it back up to the top as well. So we're just working our way around, trying to get these wires out to the edges, looking good. Just making sure that little crescent moon shape on the back is still in the right position before we go ahead and wrap these wires on. Once you're mostly happy with your tree here at the top, I bring one little wire from the left hand side over the right side of the bale. I'm going to wrap that one around first, and that's going to help to start to hold our tree in position. So just doing the same as we did with the roots on the bottom, bringing it underneath that crescent moon wire at the back and bringing it around one full loop to start with. So I'll just wrap this one next to it around as well, slightly bending it on the end there and then just tucking it underneath and wrapping it around one full loop. Keep checking your crescent shape on the back. Make sure it's in the right position before you go wrapping a bunch of wires on there. So we're just attaching a few of these wires in the center here to secure that little tree in place, and then we're going to work our way outwards on both sides. Now I'm going to bring one wire from the right hand side over to the left hand side of the bale and wrap that around that back wire as well, just to hold it all nice and secure in place so we can go ahead and wrap all of the rest of the wires on. Wrapping each wire around one full loop, but on these top ones there's actually a lot more space, so after I've done one wrap right around, I come back and I loop each wire around for second and third loops as well if you like. I do 2 loops minimum up the top here and sometimes up to 4 or 5 loops before I cut that off and crimp it down nice and tight. Now we're just going to head right around our little crescent shape there. If you know that one of the branches is definitely in the right place, you can go ahead and do your 2 full loops around, making sure that that crescent shape on the back is in the right position. You can go ahead and do a wire on each side as well if you like, just to kind of anchor the tree in the right position. Those wires should be held nice and tight enough if they're around 2 full loops. They don't need to be super tight because we're going to come along and actually bend the wires a little bit to make them look more like branches. So it's okay if there's a little bit of slack in the actual wire, but you do want it to be wrapped tight around that wire at the back. If those wires are a little bit long and they're hard to manage, you can snip a little bit off as well, as long as you leave enough for the 2 loops around. So I'll just take a little bit of that length off there. Now you can just work around the wires for each branch to secure them in place. Once you've cut and crimped all those wires in nice and tightly and there's no sharp points on the back, we're going to go ahead and make it look a lot more like branches on our tree. Now we're going to use some pliers that have a little bit of a flat tip on them, and we're going to bend our wires to make them look more like a natural tree. So you can bend the twisted trunk part as well as the twisted branch parts. So I just start in those middle parts, just starting to work with my wires and bend them in ways I think makes them look more natural. Then as I move outwards, I place the tips of my pliers onto the wire and turn them in a zigzag sort of direction. So sort of bending to the left and then bending to the right, and it just makes those wires have a bit more texture on them and make them look more like tree branches. So I just work my way around all of the wires doing the same thing. You're really still just working by eye and making your tree look symmetrical and sort of like what an actual tree would look like. Now you can take your time and check over your whole wire wrap. Make sure all your wire connections and bail are nice and tight and secure, and that there's no holes big enough for your crystal to slip out of. So there's your wire wrapped tree of life on a crescent moon crystal.